is a good idea. So let's see.
As reported by The Guardian,
Mohammed, you have a minute.
What I'm saying is the 100 to 1 ratio comes from the following figures. We know that 10,000 civilians have died. Of them, according to the IDF, as reported by The Guardian, 60, dozens, they say, about 60 Hamas died, which we're being liberal by saying 100 to 1 figures. For every one Hamas, you have to kill 100 civilians. That's effectively what we're saying. If the trajectory continues as it is, then you have to kill 3 million Palestinian civilians in order to kill 30,000 Hamas fighters. If you want to extinguish them, eviscerate them, annihilate them, destroy them, you have to do that. Now you have Herzog, who is the president.
You know what's so funny about this?
What isn't funny about like
he's giving this slightly passionate speech here, repeating himself, and he's being completely outraged about something that he got wrong. He is outraged about this. He is so outraged, and he would have every right to be outraged if it was true, but he is completely wrong. He misunderstood it. He's the only person in the room, and probably one of very few people in the world, maybe the only person in the world who actually came up with this ratio. And he's angry here on screen in front of thousands of viewers because he misunderstood something.
And you and I have both watched this entire exchange. Wouldn't you agree that was like the main takeaway point? That was like the basis for his case. He even said it. He even said, because at first he was saying, hey, anytime you're killing civilians, and it's pointed out that civilians are killed in pretty much all wars. And then he said, but it's the ratio. It's the 100 to 1 ratio that is the problem. And then he spends the entire time going off on the 100 to 1 ratio, which is all based on him not being able to read or understand a headline. And we're giving him the benefit of the doubt there, because the alternative is that he did understand it and he just lied about it, knowing that he could defend himself if people called him on it. Then it's, oh, well, I didn't read the headline correctly, so my bad. But the problem with these kinds of things is that when Hijab says these things in a video that gets millions of views, and then we come along later and correct it, well, guess what? Most of the people who absorb that 100 to 1 ratio because they're believing what Hijab says, most of those people don't ever see the correction. So they just keep thinking for the rest of their lives that there's this 100 to 1 ratio, and then they spread it, and then they spread it to other people who aren't investigating. And you get all these millions and millions of people who think that there's this 100 to 1 ratio of civilians to actual Hamas terrorists, and they never get corrected. And this is just it's a problem, and don't think Hijab is too bothered by it.
Yeah, in fact, while you were talking, I just looked for I'm just searching the transcript of this stream here for the number 100. I find 17 instances from minute 6 where he mentions the 101 ratios, 7, minute 7, 11, 12, 17, over and over throughout the entire conversation, throughout the entire debate. He brings it up again and again and again from the beginning to the end. It is his main point. It is his point is, of course, we can understand that Israel would respond. We can understand that Israel would bomb and all of that. But the problem is the ratio. That's what he's saying. He emphasizes that is the ratio. So if the ratio is not that high, if Israel is not indeed killing 100 civilians for every combatant, which is a ridiculous number, then everything is okay, according to Mohammed Hijab. So, is everything okay? And look, let's look at this party, for example.
Well, Terry Griffin.
In this way.
Well, here's the quandary for me morally, right?
Why is it a quandary, though?
I'll tell you why.
With Hamas, it's not a quandary.
I'll tell you why. Because in war, when you declare war, as Britain did with the Nazis,
100 to 1 ratio.
No,
100
of course,
to 1.
There are
combatant to non-combatant ratio.
A far higher number of children in Gaza, proportionate to population, than almost anywhere in the world. So when they go after Hamas,
give me a chance.
Very sadly, Mohammed, let me finish.
So 100 to 1 ratio again and again. His problem is the 100 to 1 ratio. He also brought this up in a different speech that he posted here, where he talked about the victory is near. He brings it up here as well. That's the main point here. Is again that
in the world today are those Israeli Zionists who are killing those people because they are being exposed as the most dishonorable and cowardly people I've ever read about. with 100-to-1 ratio of combatant to non-combatant death. How could it be that Hamas is killing more IDF than the IDF is killing Hamas? And to get your anger out, you're killing the...
He's saying the same thing again. He's also kind of putting it the wrong way. 100-to-1 ratio, combatant to non-combatant. That sounds like they're killing 100 combatants for one civilian, which would be a very good number.
That'd be some of the best war statistics in history.
That would be the best, probably. I don't think that's even possible. But now, where did he get this wrong? He referenced the Guardian article, as you can. Did we actually go there? The Guardian article. He referenced that. Yes, he said they reported 60.
As reported by the Guardian, 60 dozens, they say, about 60 Hamas died. Which we're being liberal by saying 100-to-1 figures.
So this is what he references. He gets it from the Guardian. Now, when we go to the Guardian,
he says he's a liberal. He says he's being liberal.
He's a liberal. When we go to
Mohammed
the actual
Hijab is a
Guardian,
liberal.
This is the article. Israeli airstrikes on Gaza have killed dozens of Hamas commanders, says IDF. Commanders. This is where it all went wrong. Mohammed Hijab saw this title here and somehow understood this as dozens of Hamas members, not dozens of Hamas commanders. And then he looks at it and thinks, okay, Israel has currently killed around 6,000 people in Gaza. If they only killed dozens of Hamas members, then they killed 6,000 people, including 60 of them are Hamas members. That means the rest are civilians. That would be a 100-to-1 ratio. This is the absurd thought that he formed in his mind, and just because he can't read a simple headline here, which doesn't say Hamas members, it says Hamas commanders. It doesn't say anywhere how many Hamas members they killed.
And just think about this in the big picture of Dawah. It's someone being either completely ignorant or deceptive, completely misreading some evidence, not understanding it, but then thumping your chest and yelling it and shouting down your opponents until everyone believes you. That's kind of Dawah in a nutshell, just being applied to political commentary now.
Now, here's this is very embarrassing to look at, in my opinion. This is very embarrassing. He is making such a huge blunder, and he actually goes on Piers Morgan, viewed by millions now, and runs with this fundamental claim, which is completely false. Completely false. But the first time he went to Piers Morgan, he talked about how the image of a burnt baby was AI generated, which was completely false, which was a hoax. It was debunked, but he went to Piers Morgan to argue that. Now he goes to argue this. He went to both times with completely false premises, because he can't obtain proper information and can't judge the evidence properly. Now, here is the issue. Is he just stupid? Can he not just read, or is he dishonest? I actually chatted with him about a week ago privately, and messaged him about this issue and said, "Hey, are you aware that you completely got this wrong?" And I showed him.
Are you aware of golden showers?
I said, "Did you get this wrong? You clearly got this wrong. Your whole 100-to-1 ratio was completely wrong. The headline here doesn't say members; it says commanders. So this means a lot of stuff that you said on Piers Morgan and other places is wrong, and you should make a clarification and take that back." He changed the topic and never responded to
what
the
about
issue.
What about Rabbi Shmuley's daughter selling vibrators and lube? Explain that then. Did I get that wrong? Was I wrong about that? No.
He actually did bring up Rabbi Shmuley. He said something like I recently saw that Rabbi Shmuley, David Wood, and you came together in a group therapy session or something like that.
Hey, but going along with what you're saying, because you're pointing out this should be embarrassing, right? It should be embarrassing to go on a big show against one of the most recognized rabbis in the world and build your entire case on your own stupidity, and that's best. That's the best case scenario. We're assuming he's not deliberately just lying and misrepresenting things. But I mean, you'll recall when he was talking about Ayan Hirsi Ali, he pointed out that there is a wrong citation in the notes of her book, that she gave a wrong hadith reference. And then he said, you see, this is why you can't trust her. This is why she doesn't know what she's talking about. You see, it's a miscitation in the notes, in the end notes of a book. That's enough to dismiss her. You can't trust anything she says. She's completely discredited herself. And yet this guy, he can't read a headline and accurately represent what the headline said. And this isn't supposed to be a problem for him at all.
Yeah.
Hypocrisy.
So therefore, from now on, anything Mohammed Hijab says, you can't trust him. It's all wrong. How can you trust such a guy? Now, we talked about how Mohammed Hijab got his information. He got it from The Guardian. He explicitly said there that that it is the IDF themselves who gave him that number, 100-to-1 ratio, dozens of Hamas members dead, which he completely misunderstood. Very embarrassing.
Pretty humiliating.
What kind of an academic is this? So a development happened, which is that today we have information from the IDF spokesman. Today they gave an interview and gave us an actual ratio here. So if Mohammed Hijab references the IDF and says they said it's true, they said 101, they said dozens, and he accepts it as completely true, then how about this one? Will he accept this as true as well? Maybe he should. Maybe he should be consistent. Let's look at this, David.
According to the AFP, senior Israeli military officials have said around 2 civilians have been killed for every Hamas fighter that you have successfully killed in the Gaza Strip. So that's 2 civilians for every terrorist. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, I can confirm the report, and I can say that if that is true, and I think that our numbers will be corroborated, if you compare that ratio to any other conflict in urban terrain between a military and a terrorist organization using civilians as their human shield and embedded in the civilian population, you will find that that ratio is tremendously positive and perhaps unique in the world. I understand that there are civilian casualties, and I understand that footage and coverage goes towards emotions and to cover those civilian casualties.
So it looks like she's kind of distressed about him describing this as a positive thing. She's, I guess, gonna respond to that. But David, you know about these. You know about the civilian to combatant casualty ratios somewhat. I know them somewhat. We recently looked it up. We recently talked about this stuff. So if we are to assume that Israel did indeed kill 2 civilians for each combatant during this war on Gaza right now, would that be that would be a normal number, right?
Yeah, that would be a normal number. But as he pointed out, given the area that it's in, that would be a shockingly surgical number, because that's about the same ratios you had in like World War II, because we looked this up before. It was around 2/3 of the people killed during World War II were civilians, which means it's about a 2-to-1 ratio. But notice that's overall. So that's factoring in all the times you had armies just marching in against each other, where almost all the deaths will be soldier deaths. But you factor in how many people die when they're like going through a city, and then you start getting much higher numbers of civilian casualties than a 2-to-1 ratio. And what you end up with overall, when you factor in the militaries just annihilating each other on the battlefield with the fighting in close quarters in cities and so on, you end up with about a 2-to-1 ratio. That's when you're factoring in soldiers who are just dying on a battlefield and so on. Israel's not dealing with soldiers on a battlefield. They're just dealing with the situation in a city where you've got guys who are deliberately hiding among civilians and positioning themselves among civilians in order to maximize civilian. So in other words, you've got Hamas deliberately maximizing civilian casualties if in a situation where your opposition is maximizing the number of civilian deaths, if you still ended up with a 2-to-1 ratio, that's pretty spectacular as far as military is concerned. Keep in mind, it's still bad. It's a bad situation to be in. War sucks. But if they're actually anywhere in the ballpark, I would be impressed if it was like 5-to-1 or something like that. I would be impressed with that. If they're actually in the ballpark of 2-to-1, that's shocking accuracy.
I have to say, I have to reiterate, from my perspective, when I look at it, when I look at the information given here, I would say that sounds very good, quite optimistic by the standards of war. That said, it is one party currently that is that is stating this. I would not entirely believe it. I would expect a higher number of deaths of civilians compared to combatants, because because Gaza is so densely populated, because because the whole evacuation of civilians didn't really happen as it was commanded or requested or advised. So I would expect a much higher number of civilians to die, just like you. But if this is the number, then this looks like any other war. In fact, I could bring up a few graphs here. This one is a very, very well-known and accessible one from World War II, which shows deaths by country and military or civilian. You see here Allied civilians, 58% of deaths in World War II, Axis civilians, 4%. Then Allied military 25%, Axis military 13%. These are the civilian casualty numbers, civilian to combat casualty ratios here in the Second World War, and the situation in Gaza would be quite similar to this. The estimates about World War II, I think, actually go to around 3 to 2 and 2 to 1, which would be similar to what we have in Gaza right now. So, under these circumstances, this is going like a regular war. So if somebody like Mohammed Hijab or other people who criticize Israel right now, if they criticize Israel for the high number of civilian deaths, and if they say this is not just any war, this is not just any other war, if it was just a war, just a response, just bombings, I would understand. But this is they're targeting civilians, they're just killing overwhelmingly civilians, babies, women, and so on, then that is misplaced. They are wrong about it if these numbers are true. If these numbers are true, then those people shouldn't be complaining, because these numbers are entirely normal, just like in any other war. And it is sad, and maybe there should be no deaths, but this is how war happens. This is how it goes. This war was not started by Israel, by the way. It was just started by Hamas, by the attack.
And if you have a big Hamas attack, a total bloodbath, then unless you're insane, you'd have to say that Israel has a right to defend itself against that sort of thing. How do you do that? By destroying Hamas. How do you destroy Hamas when Hamas is hiding among civilians? Well, you're going to have some civilian casualties. If they are actually anywhere near this 2-to-1 ratio, that is seriously impressive, and I have absolutely no clue what someone could complain about as far as people who actually understand. Oh yes, it is horrible when this civilian dies in this bombing and so on, but that sort of thing happens in wars.
Yeah, here is another list of several conflicts and wars where they show different ratios. The Korean War has a very high one, 74% civilian compared to compared to military. Vietnam War has like a 46%. Persian Gulf War has a very high civilian death ratio, 87, 88. So maybe Mohammed Hijab should be complaining about that. If we turn those into into the same format, it would be better to have that instead of having percentages here. I'm just realizing that the Afghanistan war was very, very clean. Like, look at that. 113,000 military deaths, 43,000 civilian deaths. So only 28% civilian deaths. But in general, you can see that there is an overall, like, it fluctuates. It is different in every war. In some wars, it is much easier to target combatants. In other wars, it is much more difficult to target combatants without killing civilians. But it looks like, I mean, anyone can see, if you just look on a map, if you just look at photos of a city in Gaza, it will be very, very difficult to bomb or to target, to hit certain targets in Gaza and not harm civilians. And on top of that, the fact that also Israel repeatedly warned to evacuate certain areas and go to safer areas, but people just didn't do that, or Hamas didn't allow them to do that, and Hamas didn't build any shelters, didn't build any means for protection for these people. The numbers seem very, very good, but again, as said, I can't take this at face value. I can't trust it as it is right now. But if we are to take their word, which Mohammed Hijab did before, then this is very good.
And this guy was even being sort of tentative with how he's describing it, saying, yes, these are the reports. We'll have to see if this, if it actually turns out to be the case. But he's pointing out that, if it's anything in that ballpark, that is really, really impressive. By the way, some of those statistics you were putting up, it looks like they only factor in like people who are actually killed, by bullets or bombs, because like the number of deaths in Yemen is way higher than that, but it's due to things like starvation as a result of the war. But I know the numbers are way higher for like Yemen and so on. So looks like they're only factoring in like people who are actually killed by, soldiers, bombs, and bullets, and so on.
Yeah. I'm also
in other words, way more civilians have died in those statistics about Yemen and so on. It's just not directly killed by soldiers.
It's also interesting that when we talk about the Israel, bombing civilians, or Israel killing civilians, or Israel being so extremely bad that they have this very high civilian casualty ratio compared to other conflicts, as Mohammed Hijab just claimed, for example, in that video that we watched. We can go back to the other wars, and we have the CNN source, which actually reported this whole. Which reported about these numbers. They also quote the United Nations and say, during the 50 days of hostilities in Gaza in 2014, 2,251 Palestinians were killed, of whom 1,462 were believed to be civilians, according to the United Nations. That equates to a ratio of 1.8 civilians for every non-civilian, which is a very good number. Which is a very, I don't want to say good, but which is a very average, a very normal number.
Yeah, you don't want to say good because you don't want to say that people getting killed is good. But I would say in that area, a densely populated area where, again, the terrorists want to maximize civilian deaths. That's surgical, man. That is Israel is sending in surgeons to fight their wars if they're getting these kinds of numbers.
I also there is a report about how Israel is using an AI system which finds targets and automatically directs airstrikes on those, trying to reduce civilian casualties as much as possible. But again, those who say they're just killing civilians, they're just bombing the cities, this is just genocide, I'm sorry, but according to these numbers, this is not a genocide. According to these numbers, this is a very regular war that Israel wages. According to these numbers, in 2014, they waged a very irregular war, and under very impressive, circumstances had a ratio of 1.8 civilians for every non-civilian, which is comparable to regular normal conflicts that happen around the world. So nobody can genuinely really accuse Israel here of committing a genocide. That is ridiculous. That is completely absurd. Clearly, there is no targeting of overwhelming numbers of civilians going on here compared to combatants.
And it would mean that Israel's method is incredibly effective as far as warning people ahead of time. Hey, there is a Hamas target right there. You need to get out. If you are not Hamas, you need to get out of there. It means they are incredibly effective at minimizing civilian deaths. And so, yeah, the criticisms would, if again, you and I are in the same ballpark in that we're going to have to see some additional evidence of the actual numbers for the actual ratios. But yeah, given what you just put up from a previous conflict in 2014, and then the reports that are coming out now, that is I mean, how do you condemn them for that?
I know, right? And there are some sources already saying, how dare Israel say this is okay? But I'm sorry, nobody says killing civilians is okay. The guy here doesn't say it's okay. He obviously says it's sad, but this is a normal number. Let's see what else is being